All right, first and foremost, I'm giving all esteem to the Most High, whose true set-apart name is Yahuwah, and our Abri or Hebrew language, as people refer to it. I also want to say shalom, shalom to those of you who are taking the time to take this lesson in. I'm one of the children of the Most High, and this message is called Search the Scriptures. Good news unfolds for a house divided by two folds. Now, I know that title sounds a little long, but I think you're going to get it, and it's going to come together literally by the end of this message. In fact, we're going to be dealing with Romans chapter 11 in this lesson, and we're going to be unveiling the truth behind the topic of grafting that is discussed in Romans chapter 11. Now, before I jump into that, I just want to say this. For those of you who have not yet come into this truth, you need to understand the identity of our people who are being called Negroes today, who are indeed the bloodline descendants of the 12 tribes of Yisrael, or who people refer to as the Israelites. I refer to us as the Yisraelites or the Yashraim because in our Abri language, that root word Yasha is there and was put into the name of Yisrael because it specifically refers to being upright. And so as the Yashraim, we are called the upright people by the Most High Yahuwah himself, who established his covenant with our 12 tribes in front of Mount Sinai. So it's extremely important that we are aware of that, because if you don't understand the identity of the people being discussed in this book known as the Bible, you're not going to be able to actually follow the past, present, and prophetic narrative that is being given in the book, because this indeed is the past, present, and prophetic narrative of our people being played out. And so many people have not understood the prophecies in the book because they didn't know who these prophecies were really applying to. But once you understand the identity, everything else unfolds. All right. So let's understand that. The other thing that I want to make clear is this, is that when we speak of Romans chapter 11 and the topic of grafting, many people have not understood that the person writing Romans chapter 11 is Paul, or his true name, Shaul. And Shaul actually was a very high level and learned Pharisee. So he was taught basically at the teaching of one of the strictest Pharisaic teachers that was around, and his name was Gamaliel. And specifically, Shaul was one of those who actually excelled in the learning. So when he wrote Romans chapter 11, he was writing from a knowledge base of the Torah, which included our teachings, instructions, the law of our people, the commands. He understood all of that, but he also understood the Nabaim, meaning he understood the prophecies tied to our people. He understood all that is involved within the prophecies in the law of this book. He understood it to a very high degree. And so when he wrote Romans chapter 11, he was writing with a knowledge base, and also because he was living in a period where there was more knowledge about our identity. He was writing with a knowledge base of not just what was in the book, but also what was being lived out. And so many people who jump into Romans chapter 11 look at it without that context that is needed to understand what is being said. In fact, many of us have been taught by churchianity a false doctrine of grafting that does not really relate to what is being said in Romans chapter 11. And so we're going to get to the bottom of that right now. And in order to do that, I want us first to start with this passage in John chapter 10, verse 16, where you'll see that Yahusha, that being the name of our Messiah, meaning the salvation of Yahuwah. Yes, so Yahusha Hamashiach, and Hamashiach means the Messiah, was actually speaking to our people in this passage. And he said, "And other sheep I have which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice. and there shall be one fold and one shepherd. Okay, so remember that. Yahushua was making it clear that he had another fold of sheep that were not currently with him at that time, but he was going to bring them so that they would also hear his voice, and there would be only one fold that included that other fold that was not there at that time. So it's important to understand that there was going to be two folds brought together. Okay, now with that being said, we need to find out more information about this. So let's go to Ezekiel chapter 37. When you get to the prophet's book in verse 16, you're going to see that the Most High Yahuwah spoke to the prophet. He came to him and he said, "Son of man, take a stick and write on it for Yahudah or Judah and the people of Yashrael associated with him." So you have one stick with Yahudah and the people of Yashrael who are tied to him. And then it says, then take another stick and write on it for Joseph or Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and all the house of Yashrael associated with him. So we have two separate sticks, one for Yahudah and the other stick for Joseph or Ephraim. All right, so two sticks. You get to verse 17 and it says, and join them one to another into one stick, that they may become one in your hand. So we see now those two sticks, Yahudah and Ephraim, being joined together into one. All right, now you go down a little bit further into the passage and you find in verse 18 it says, and when your people, the Yashraelim, when they say to you, will you not tell us what you mean by these? Say to them, thus says Yahuwah the Mighty One, behold, I am about to take the stick of Joseph that is in the hand of Ephraim and the tribes of Yashrael associated with him, and I will join with it the stick of Yahudah and make them one stick, that they may be one in my hand. So you see, these sticks were representations of two separate groups of tribes, the tribes associated with Ephraim and the tribes associated with Yahudah. And they were to be joined into one and become one in the hand of the Most High Yahuwah. Okay, so now understanding that, we go down a little further and it says, and when the sticks on which you write are in your hand before their eyes, then say to them, thus says Yahuwah the Mighty One, behold, I will take the people of Yashrael from the nations among which they have gone, and will gather them from all around, and bring them to their own land, and I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Yashrael. Now we need to understand these words, but it gets even clearer in verse 24, because then the Most High says this, and Dawood, my servant, shall be king over them, and they all shall have one shepherd. They shall also walk in my judgments and observe my statutes and do them. Now, we go back to John chapter 10 verse 16, which we read. We should see then that there is a cross reference here. We should see that now Yahushua HaMashiach, when he spoke of that other fold and how he would bring them and they would hear his voice and there would be one fold and one shepherd, he was reminding his people of the prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 37. And he was speaking as to the fulfilling of this now being set into motion. We must understand this connection. All right, now, with that being said, we have to understand that in our Yashraelite history, or the history of our people, the 12 tribes, we were divided. In fact, if you want to understand anything about our divided kingdom, you have to go into the book of 1 Kings. Chapters 11 and 12 will give you the summary as to how we were divided. All right. Now, if you do that, you're going to find this, that in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 11, the Most High Yahuwah came to King Solomon with a message. In fact, it says this, Wherefore Yahuwah said unto Solomon, For as much as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and will give it to thy servant. So see, the Most High Yahuwah came to let King Solomon know that because he had not kept the ways that he was commanded to follow, he did not keep the covenant ways, he did not keep the statutes, the laws that the Most High told him to live by, because King Solomon, of course, went off into wicked idolatry. And on top of that, he also went and joined himself to strange or foreign wives, which was against the land of our people of Yashrael. Because he had broken all of these commands, the Most High Yahuwah then said that he would now tear the kingdom from him. In fact, he said he was going to give it to one of his servants. Now, this servant that the Most High Yahuwah was speaking of is a man who went by the name of Jeroboam. In fact, the Most High sent a prophet to go tell Jeroboam that he was going to receive part of this kingdom from the hand of King Solomon's son. Yes, the Most High Yahuwah said that he would not take it directly from King Solomon, but instead he would wait until after the death of King Solomon, and when King Solomon's son got on the throne, then he would tear the kingdom away. In fact, if you go into the passage found in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 35, you're going to see it says there, as the Most High speaks through the prophet to Jeroboam, but I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand, yes, King Solomon's son, and will give it unto thee, Jeroboam, even 10 tribes. So Jeroboam was to receive 10 tribes from the 12 tribes that existed. So this was definitely a big split. In fact, you're going to find that these 10 tribes are referred to as the Northern Kingdom in our history. Or the Northern Kingdom was also called by other names, such as the House of Yashrael, or the House of Ephraim, or the House of Joseph. Now, another name that was applied to the Northern Kingdom was the name of its very capital. The capital of the Northern Kingdom was Samaria. All right? Now, another thing we need to understand about this Northern Kingdom is that the people associated with this Northern Kingdom were called Gentiles, heathen, strangers, and foreigners at different points throughout history. In fact, the reason they were given these titles was because members of this Northern Kingdom, for a large part of this Northern Kingdom's existence, spent their time living dispersed amongst the Gentiles, or the other nations or other peoples outside of Yashrael, as well as the heathen, meaning those who were living apart from the laws of the Most High, who were not considered to be his people, as well as amongst the strangers. So they were called strangers or foreigners because they were estranged from the laws and the customs of our people. We have to understand this. In fact, when people see the word Gentiles, they also have a wrong definition of that, which I want to add some clearing up on right now. Gentiles does not automatically mean non-Yashraelite. In fact, the word often applies to Yashraelites because it simply means nation or peoples. Now, it is often applied to our people when we are dispersed away from our land, because that is describing the state of our being at that point, but as being amongst the nations and the peoples. But it does not mean any specific nation. It just in general means nations or people. You can look that up in the Strong's Concordance. It's just often, especially in the so-called Old Testament, it often refers to those who are non-Israelites, but it's also applied to our people. You just have to really look into scripture to see that. Now, to understand that word even more, you have to use the proper social context. So you have to understand what's going on in scripture and then apply what type of Gentile we're referring to. But with that being said, also know that we were called Greeks at different points. Those of our Northern Kingdom, and even sometimes those of our Southern Kingdom, which we'll get to in a bit, were called by that title specifically because when the Greeks ruled over us, many of us took on their ways of life. So another title that was tied to this northern kingdom at large was the term of the uncircumcision. The reason being is because Abraham was brought into covenant with the Most High, and circumcision became a representation of this covenant. However, when the northern kingdom members had gone off into their idolatry, or they had gone off into their sin, they were seen as the uncircumcised because they were no longer keeping the covenant of the Most High. Now, the other thing we want to understand is that the 10 tribes associated with this northern kingdom were the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Shimeon, the tribe of Levi, the tribe of Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, and the 2 half-tribes of Joseph, known as Ephraim and Manasseh. As you can see, Ephraim is where the northern kingdom also got one of its major names, being called the House of Ephraim, because specifically Ephraim became a representation for this scattering into a foreign situation. In fact, even Joseph was also tied to that on some level. And so I may mention that a little bit later on. But the next verse down in 1 Kings chapter 11:36 says, "And unto his son will I give one tribe, that Dawood my servant may have a light always before me in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen me to put my name there." So see, the Most High Yahuwah now is also letting Jeroboam know through the prophet that unto King Solomon's son, he is going to still give one of those tribes of the 12. One of those tribes is still going to be given over to King Solomon's son. So we've got to understand that although 10 went to Jeroboam, you still had 2 tribes left. The tribe of Yehuda or Judah, which was already the kingly tribe of the 12. So that tribe was already given to the kings and the king's son, because that was already where the throne was situated. But the Most High Yahuwah said he will give him one tribe also. So Benjamin or Benjamin became that tribe. In fact, when you look at the southern kingdom, realize that it was called by its kingly tribe's name as a nickname. It was called the House of Yehuda, or the House of Judah as people call it. It was also called by the name of its capital, of Jerusalem. The people associated with this southern kingdom were called the Yahudim, that means the worshippers of Yahuwah, the word that many people now today have corrupted and say Jew. All right. Now, the other thing is, this southern kingdom, the people in it were called the circumcision, because at large they were keeping the laws and the covenant and the customs of our people. They were sticking to the laws of the Most High Yahuwah. Now, as I said, it included 2 tribes, the kingly tribe of Yehuda and the tribe of Benjamin, or Judah and Benjamin. Now, looking at this, we got to understand that having these 2 split parts of our kingdom, it turned into a point where the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom operated like 2 totally separate nations. In fact, they went to war with each other as though there was never any relationship there that was good. In fact, the 2 of them, between the 2 of these parts of the kingdom, there were wars in which hundreds of thousands of our people were murdered or killed off in this war. So we've got to understand this, is that these 2 function as 2 separate nations, as 2 separate folds. And we have to understand this point in our history. Now, I do want to say this, that although the southern kingdom started off with Yehuda and Benjamin only, northern kingdom fell into idolatry and sin to the point where they no longer even had a temple of worship to the Most High Yahuwah in the northern kingdom. So the Levi, or the Levites, the priestly tribe, no longer had a place to serve Yahuwah. So they went and left the northern kingdom, many of them, and came over to the southern kingdom, because there was still a temple up to serve Yahuwah. So this is important for us to understand as well. So the southern kingdom then included Yehuda, Benjamin, and Lewi as the three tribes associated with it. Now, understanding this, we can also go to the book of Oshay for some of this history, or the book called Hosea, chapter 4, verses 16 through 17. There you're going to find out the state of affairs with that northern kingdom, or the house of Ephraim. In fact, it says, for Yashvael slides back as a backsliding heifer. Now Yahuwah will feed them as a lamb in a large place. Ephraim is joined to idols. Let him alone. So, very clearly, northern kingdom, the house of Yashvael, the house of Ephraim, went off into their idolatry. The Most High said, okay, let them alone. In fact, you find out that the Most High Yahuwah actually divorced these 10 tribes of Yashvael and sent them all. You'll find that also in the book of Yirmiyahu, or Jeremiah, chapter 3. All right? Now, go into the book of Oshay, chapter 11, verse 12, and you're going to find there that it says, Ephraim compasses me about with lies, and the house of Yashvael with deceit. So we see Ephraim is not faithful. But Yahuda yet rules with the mighty one and is faithful with the saints. Now, keep this in mind. The northern kingdom went off and was in their idolatry. But Yahuda, the southern kingdom, was still being faithful with the saints. We need to keep that phrase in mind. We're going to come back to it in a little bit. All right, so we see so far we have split kingdom, northern and southern kingdom of Yashvael. Those two split parts of the kingdom went to war with each other like two totally separate nations. Ephraim ends up going off into idolatry, and Yahuda, or the house of Yahuda, or Judah, ended up still being faithful with the saints. So noting that the saints are considered to be those who are the people of the Most High. Now, if we were to now go back a chapter in the book of Ezekiel to the chapter 36, right? We're going to find that there's a scattering that is described by the Most High Yahuwah. In fact, he goes on to say through the prophet, and I scattered them, the Israelites, among the heathen, and they were dispersed through the countries. According to their way and according to their doings, I judged them. Now, I want you to understand, whenever our people sin, we are scattered away from our land. There is a pattern throughout Scripture where you will see that. In fact, what many people don't realize is that it's because our land, our promised land, is protected by a law of the promised land. And you find that law in Leviticus chapter 18, verses, let's say, 24 through 28. And when you read that passage, or those verses there, you're going to find that specifically, whenever our people sinned, we defiled ourselves, but we also defiled our land. And if we defiled our land, then our land would become sick. It would basically vomit us up and spew us out. And so that explains why we are still in diaspora even today, away from our homeland, is because our people have not yet returned back to the ways of our set-apart land. We have to go back to our set-apart laws, because that's what we get judged by. The righteous judge judges us by the set-apart laws, and he wants us to return. So, understanding that, I want you to see that this is all building up to now what grafting is all about. So keep all of these points in mind. But as I said about this scattering, just so you can kind of get a picture of this, because as I said, this will give you the context, the historical, social, and spiritual context that is in place in Romans chapter 11. If you go to the fact that all 12 tribes of our people were in our Egyptian captivity back around 1500 BC, right? When we were brought out with Moshe, we went to Mount Sinai, we received the covenant, and then eventually, through time, we ended up being led into the promised land, right? We lived there for some time as a people, set up our different dwelling areas. But then the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom split happened once we started having kings over us. I mean, King Dawood actually ruled us well and put us in a good situation of peace. But then King Solomon, who started off in a good way, ended up falling into idolatry. And because of that, that led to the kingdom split. And after that kingdom split, as a result of the sins of the northern kingdom ended up going into the Assyrian captivity. And that was around 722 BC. Now, you can read about that in Oshay, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, and Ezekiel. Once that Assyrian captivity took the northern kingdom never made it back to our land of Yashrael collectively as the 10-tribe nation. Never made it back. Now, throughout different points, a few people may have made it back to the land of Yashrael, but never collectively as the 10 tribes did they make it back to our land. So we need to understand that. That happened as early as 722 BC. So now the only people living in the land were the southern kingdom, the house of Yahudah or Judah. In fact, you'll see that even the house of Yahudah, the southern kingdom, went into captivities. In fact, around 587 BC, you'll see that the Babylonian captivity started, where many of our people from the southern kingdom were now carried off into Babylonian captivity in phases. So when they were all carried off into Babylon, they had done some time there. About 70 years is actually what they did, and this was because of the breaking of laws. Specifically, one of the major things that was being done was the breaking of the Shabbat law. And so for 70 years, they were to now do this bondage. Now, the Persian Mede captivity took over after that, where the Persian Medes came and conquered Babylon and actually took our people out of the land of Babylon and started carrying us back into our southern kingdom territories in phases. After we returned to our land, and we were there for some time, for a couple centuries, then the Greek captivity took over right on our soil, right in our land, where the Greeks started to encroach upon our territories as early as 332 BC. And they laid heavy oppression on our people. They actually started to influence our people to take on their ways. Many of our people had actually consented to become like the Greeks and left the covenant. So this is where I spoke of some of our people taking on the term of being Greeks or Hellenized Israelites, where they were no longer living according to the covenant of our fathers. Now, that Greek period was followed by a mixed period of what you might call Greco-Roman influence, but then eventually the Romans came in and took us captive in our land at 70 AD. And so you'll find that that same captivity that the Romans put on us in 70 AD is the same captivity that our people, being called Negroes today, are living under here in America, as America is nothing but an extension of the Roman Empire. So, understanding this history is important. In fact, you're going to find specifically that when it comes to this southern kingdom and the 4 captivities from Babylon to Persian to this current Roman captivity, they were all prophesied about back in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. In fact, you're going to find that statue in chapter 2 had different elements that made up sections of its body. Each of those different elements correspond to the different kingdoms that ruled over our southern kingdom. In Daniel chapter 7, you'll find that there are 4 beasts described. Each of those beasts corresponds to one of those 4 kingdoms that we had ruling over us. So we must understand this. And all of these different captivities led to a scattering. So when you get to Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah chapter 50 verse 17, you're going to see that it describes that to us. It says, in fact, Yashrael is a scattered sheep, The lions have driven him away. First, the king of Assyria have devoured him. See, that Assyrian captivity took the northern kingdom, devoured them up. Then it goes on to say, and last, this Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, hath broken his bones. Now see, Babylon took the southern kingdom where our kingly throne is set up. And so the backbone of our tribes was actually located there. And Babylon broke that. It came and took us and put us under their subjugation and captivity. So we need to understand that all these different captivities we went through put us into a diaspora. They dispersed us. They led to scatterings of our people to live amongst different nations. So we lived amongst the Gentiles and we lived as Gentiles under these different scatterings. With that being said, we need to understand that a diaspora is nothing but the movement, migration, settlement, or scattering away of a people from their homeland. Our people are never strangers to a diaspora because we are living in one right now. In fact, people refer to us as the Afro-diaspora. So we need to understand that in its context of prophecy. Now, as I said, with the word Gentile, people have been confused because they have not understood that the different meanings behind the word Gentile go from nations to peoples to even the word heathens, but also after the manner of Gentiles, or that manner of nations or peoples or heathens. It also refers to often, as I said, the Hellenistic or Greek-oriented peoples, people who have taken on those customs. So we have to understand this when we read the text, because we have to use social context clues or even prophetic context clues to understand what is actually taking place. We have to do this. It's extremely important. Historical context, all of it plays a role. Now, also understanding that when diaspora or dispersed peoples are talked about throughout Scripture, a very important but hidden population here is the fact of these dispersed Yashruelites being amongst the foreign nations. Even in the Strong's Concordance, where it mentions about Christians, and I use that term loosely because that is not a term our people put on ourselves. Our oppressors, specifically the Greeks at Antioch, who were ruling over us, called us by that name as a derogatory remark. But even when they describe our people being labeled as Christians, being scattered amongst the Gentiles, they are referring to Yashruelites. But people don't get that, or they don't hear that, because for many years and years and years and years and years, centuries, people have been removed from who the true people are, who the true 12 tribes are, and how when people were being called Christians, they weren't just anybody. They were Yashruelites that were being labeled as Christians. And we were being labeled that, as I said, by our oppressors. In fact, you'll find more evidence in John chapter 7, verse 35, when you see that Yahushua, Hamashiach, was speaking to our southern kingdom people. And as he was speaking to the Yahudim, he told them that he was going to go somewhere where they would not be able to find him. And so when he said that, that left them questioning. And then they said, well, where is he going to go that we cannot find him? Will he go into the dispersed amongst the Gentiles and teach the Gentiles? So see, they were already aware that our people, many of our people, those of the northern kingdom, was dispersed amongst the other nations. And so he was wondering or they were wondering if Yahushua was going to go and seek out these dispersed peoples of our nation and start to, or of the northern kingdom part of our nation, and start to teach them. So this was something that was well known with our people according to our history. But many of our people today didn't realize this history. In fact, when we speak of the southern kingdom that Yahushua Hamashiach lived among, we have to remember these are the only people who were in the land at the time that Yahushua walked, did his ministry, and died and resurrected. It was only the southern kingdom that was living in our land at that time. In fact, when you see the prophecy that Yahushua Hamashiach gave to the southern kingdom family. When you see what he said to us, he actually said in Luke chapter 21, verse 24, that there was going to be another dispersion. In fact, he said, and they, speaking of those of our people, shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. So let's understand that our people were going to be dispersed into all nations. Those of our people who were still in the land, this was what was going to happen to them. And it says, in Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So our people were going to be scattered to the four corners, all nations. Very important for us to understand this, because specifically about 40 years or so after the death and resurrection of Yahusha, this prophecy was set into motion, because Jerusalem was then surrounded by the Romans in 70 AD. And when they got there, they actually murdered many of our people right there on our soil. They exiled many of our people into the other parts of the continent of Africa, because as Yisrael's in Northeast Africa, many of our people went and fled according to the word of Yahusha, and they fled into the west coast of Africa, and some went into other parts of the territories of Africa. But many of ours who went to the west coast of Africa settled in an area that you can find on a 1747 map of the west coast of Africa, known as Negro Land. And in that region, you will find that there, charted on the 1747 map, is the kingdom of Yahudah, or the kingdom of Judah. And it was also called the Wida, which was specifically because those who were colonizing in that area did not know how to pronounce our name properly. Now, that is also known as the Slave Coast or the Gold Coast area. In fact, that's the same area where those ships from the transatlantic trade came and picked up our ancestors who were settled there, and then dispersed them into the rest of the world, put them into diaspora and scattering away from our homeland. So this explains why you will find even in the prophet Zechariah or Zechariah chapter 2 verse 6, it says, "Hold there, flee from the land of the north, declares Yahuwah, for I have dispersed you as the four winds of the heavens, declares Yahuwah." Because see, the people from the north came down and actually picked our people up and dispersed us. So the Most High Yahuwah had given us warning well in advance as to what would take place with our people. See what I mean when I say this is the past, present, and prophetic word of our people, all laid out. Now, we've got to understand, when we understand the historical context and even some of the prophetic context I spoke about earlier, now we need to look at our people and our land as a set apart garden of the Most High Yahuwah. When he formed a covenant with our people, he set us apart from all others because he had a plan in place that he is playing out even to this day for his people. It's extremely important that we make note of this. He is acting on his plan. Now, if you go to Yeshayahu or Isaiah chapter 27 verse 6, you're going to see it says this about his set apart garden. It says, "And he shall cause them that come of Jacob to take root. Yashrael shall blossom and bud and fill the face of the world with fruit." So we are dealing with something, our nation of Yashrael taking root and then blossoming and budding and filling the entire world with fruit. We need to understand this. Now, let's look at this for a second. We're going to go into the book of Yobel, or the book of Jubilees as it's called, chapter 8 verses 18 through 19. We're going to see more of this gardening concept when it comes to Zion. That's right. Our people are also nicknamed as Zion. And even our territory that was promised to our people is given the name of Zion. And there's some significance there. But before we get to that, first let's go back to the book of Jubilees, chapter 8, verses 18 through 19. And we're going to go back to the time of Noah and how Noah rejoiced when he saw the portion that came forth from Shem and for his sons, meaning the sons of Shem. And he remembered everything that he had spoken because he had earlier blessed Shem. And he remembered that prophecy that he had spoken with his mouth as he had said this: Blessed be Yahuwah, the mighty one of Shem, and may Yahuwah dwell in the dwelling of Shem. And he knew that the Garden of Eden is the Holy of Holies, the set apart of set aparts, and the dwelling of Yahuwah, and Mount Sinai, the center of the desert, and Mount Zion, the center of the navel of the earth. These three were created as set apart places facing each other. So we see what's being said here is that specifically the Garden of Eden is attached to the dwellings of Shem. Now, these people of Shem that are being spoken of are the people connected also to Mount Zion and Mount Sinai. These are none other than our ancestors and us today, the Israelites. So we have to understand that we are even connected by the territory we were given to the very Garden of Eden. We ourselves are looked at as a garden. Everything started off back in creation when man and woman were created. They were then put in the garden. And so we have to understand this is because this garden plays a huge role in how everything plays out for our people. And we need to understand it from the concept of a garden. In fact, if you go to the prophet Yirmiyahu, chapter 31, verse 28, there in the prophet it says, And it shall come to pass that like as I have watched over them to pluck up and to break down and to throw down and to destroy and to afflict, so will I watch over them to build and to plant, saith Yahuwah. All right, let's even go to Yeshayahu or Isaiah chapter 60 verses 18. It says, Then all your people will be righteous. They will possess the land forever. The branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I may be glorified. So I hope you see how this is all building up to Romans chapter 11, where we're going to deal with grafting. All right, so taking all this in, let's also look at Yeshayahu or Isaiah chapter 61 verses 3. It says, To appoint unto them that mourn in Zion, to give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning. And it goes on to say that they might be called trees of righteousness, the planting of Yahuwah, that he might be glorified. All right, so very important for us to understand that there is a tree that is coming into play here. And in fact, we want to take some time to see what this tree looks like. And specifically, if you look at Yirmiyahu, let's say Jeremiah chapter 11, and we'll go to verses 10 through 16. I have to read this because it will give you the perspective that we should look at ourselves through the words of the Most High Yahuwah. So we want to see how he looks at us so that we understand how we should see ourselves. And it says in Yirmiyahu chapter 11 verses 10 through 16, and I'm reading from the 1611 KJV. It says, Therefore, let me see. It says, I'm sorry, let me start at verse 10, right? Yeah, so it says, They are turned back to the iniquities of their fathers, which refused to hear my words, and they went after other mighty ones to serve them. the house of Yashrael and the house of Yahudah have broken my covenant, which I made with their fathers. Therefore, thus saith Yahuwah, behold, I will bring evil upon them, which they shall not be able to escape. And though they shall cry unto me, I will not hearken unto them. Then shall the cities of Yahudah and inhabitants of Jerusalem go and cry unto the mighty ones, unto whom they offer incense. But they shall not save them at all in the time of their trouble. For according to the number of thy cities were thy mighty ones, O Yahudah, and according to the number of the streets of Jerusalem, have you set up altars to that shameful thing, even altars to burn incense unto Baal. Therefore, pray not thou for this people, neither lift up a cry or prayer for them, for I will not hear them in that time, that they cry unto me for their trouble. See, this is Jacob's trouble, or Jacob's trouble as it's referred to. And it says, what hath my beloved to do in mine house, seeing she hath wrought lewdness with me? And the holy or set apart flesh is passed from thee. When thou dost evil, then thou rejoicest. Yahuwah called thy name a green olive tree, fair and of goodly fruit. With the noise of a great tumult he hath kindled fire upon it, and the branches of it are broken. So the branches of our green olive tree, the branches, the tribes of our tree, of our people, of Yashrael, have been broken according to prophecy. So we have to understand this. Just as I said, at one point, Ephraim was joined to idols, right? Yahudah was still faithful with the saints at that time. Remember, faithful with the saints at that time. But there was a falling away. Now, that falling away happened also with the southern kingdom. But before we get to that falling away with the southern kingdom, we need to understand that there was also going to be a calling back of the northern kingdom. And so in Oshay chapter 1 verse 6 to 7, you're going to see that the Most High gave prophecy through Oshay after he had him marry a wife of whoredoms named Gomer. So this woman was a whore, but the prophet was told to go and marry her because there was now a example being laid out as to what was taking place with the house of Ephraim. In fact, after they got married, the wife Gomer gave birth to a child. She gave birth to a daughter, and then she actually bare again and gave birth to another child, another daughter. Actually, I think the first child may have been, I'm forgetting the name right now, but gave birth to this daughter. And the Mighty One said unto him, call her name Lo-Rahama, for I will no more have mercy upon the house of Yashrael. So no more mercy is being represented here. Then it says, but I will utterly take them away, but I will have mercy upon the house of Yahudah. See, Judah, because Judah was still being faithful with the saints, Judah was still receiving mercy. All right. Now, you go further into that chapter, you're going to find that the Most High says in verses 8 through 10, now when she had weaned Lo-Rahama, Gomer had weaned her daughter, she then conceived and bare a son, and said to the Mighty One, call his name Lo-Ami, for ye are not my people, and I will not be your Mighty One. Yet the number of the children of Yashrael shall be as the sand of the sea. So hold on, stop there for a second. We're being told that this northern kingdom is being told that they are no longer the people of the Most High, and he will not be their Mighty One, which is, as I mentioned earlier, that the northern kingdom was then divorced from the Most High Yahuwah. But then it goes on to say that yet there's going to be a time where the children of Yashrael are going to be as numerous as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor outnumbered. So that sounds like the prophecy that was promised to Abraham at the time that the covenant was being established between Abraham and the Most High Yahuwah. So the Most High Yahuwah is giving assurance that this prophecy is still going to come to pass. In fact, he then goes on to say, and it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, you are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, ye are the sons of the living mighty one, Yahuwah. So you see, this is what is going on, is that the Most High Yahuwah told the northern kingdom that, yes, you will not receive mercy and you will no longer be my people. But then he says, but there will come a time where I will say that those who I called not my people, now I am going to say you are sons of the mighty one. So he is going to call the northern kingdom his people again, according to this prophecy. And indeed, that is what took place. In fact, you'll see also in verse 11, it says, then shall the children of Yahudah and the children of Yashrael be gathered together and appoint themselves one head. So see, we go back to that one shepherd that was spoken about in John 10:16, or that one shepherd that was spoken about in Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 24. And it goes on to say, and they shall come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Yezreel. Now, if you go to Oshay chapter 2, verse 23, pay attention to this quote right here. It says, and I will sow her unto me in the earth. So we talking garden talk again. And it goes on to say, and I will have mercy upon her that had not obtained mercy, and I will say to them which were not my people, thou art my people, and they shall say, thou art my Elohim. So see, very clear, we were being told again that the northern kingdom was going to be brought back in. Our people were going to be gathered together again and sown in the earth. So we talking plants. Grafting is plant terms. So we need to understand that before you get to Romans chapter 11, where it talks about the grafting, we have to see who the population is that was being spoken to when that letter was being written, called Romans. Because see, people automatically think Romans, so they think non-Yashraelites. But they don't realize our people were dispersed and living in Rome at the time of these letters. So they were the people that were being written to. In fact, Romans chapter 9, verse 24 to 25 is blatant proof of that. In fact, it says, even us, whom he hath called. Now look at the us. And it says, whom he hath called. Not of the Yahudim only, or the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles, or of the peoples, or the nations, right? It says, as he hath said also in Oshay, or the book of Hosea, which we just read, says, I will call them my people which were not my people, and her beloved which was not beloved. So clearly, Shaul, or Paul, is writing to those who are of the northern kingdom. So these are northern kingdom Gentiles. These are the people who are Yashraelites, who were scattered to live amongst the Gentiles. Tells you right here. Because very specifically, he's quoting prophecy from Oshay about the northern kingdom. So this can only be about Yashraelites. But with that being said, here's another clue in this passage. Look at where it says, whom he hath called. Because we know that the only people who were called by the Most High Yahuwah were his people. You go to Oshay chapter 11, verse 1, it tells you that. Because it says, when Yashrael was a child, then I loved him and called my son out of Egypt. Now remember, I mentioned earlier about our Egyptian captivity. All 12 tribes were there, and all 12 tribes were called out of Egypt. And so Yashrael were the called people of the Most High, according to Oshay chapter 11, verse 1. Says, I called my son out of Egypt. We are the called out ones. The ecclesia, as it's referred to in Greek. The called out assembly. What people have falsely labeled by the corrupt word church. We are the assembly of the Most High, his congregation, his called out ones, his saints. And I have not forgotten. We will get to that term in a minute. But, so now we need to look at Romans chapter 11, verse 17 through 18, where it says, "And if some of the branches be broken off, and thou being a wild olive tree were grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the root and fatness of the olive tree, boast not against the branches. But if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee." So we got to understand what that olive tree looked like at the time that Shaul was writing this. The Yahudim, or the Jews, the southern kingdom, were falling away because the leaders of the southern kingdom had rejected the cornerstone. They had rejected Hamashiach, the Messiah. And because they had done that, they were also cast out into darkness because the leaders were responsible for his crucifixion, right? Or his hanging. The chief priest of our people, the leaders of our people, played a role in setting that up. And so therefore, the blood was upon the heads of our people because they had specifically declared that they were willing to have the blood on their hands. And they did that when they asked for him to be released to them for his hanging. So this is important for us to be aware of. Now, where it talks about if some of the branches be broken off, remember, some of the tribes being broken off. The southern kingdom tribes were now being broken off and cast off. And it says, and when I say cast off, I don't mean cast off forever. I mean being sent out into darkness as part of prophecy. But there's always a calling back, and we'll get to that. But it says, "And thou being a wild olive tree." Because see, now, speaking to the northern kingdom Gentiles, they were considered to be wild. In fact, you can go to Oshay chapter 8, verse 9, and you're going to see there that Ephraim was considered to be a wild donkey wandering alone as they were carried off into Assyria. So that's important for us to note because the lifestyle that they lived that led to them going into Assyrian captivity made them wild. They grew apart from the covenant, so they were living wild. They weren't in their natural setting. They weren't in their groomed, kept setting, and we'll see that in a second. But now they were being grafted in onto that same olive tree. They were being grafted back into the tree that they were originally all a part of. And it says, "But now if you partake of the root and the fatness of that olive tree, boast not against the branches." Because see, now they were tied into the root, and we're going to see what that root is in a sec. But it says, "But if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee." So we got to talk about this for a second. In Romans chapter 11, verse 16, it says, "For if the first fruit be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, so are the branches." So we can see that the first fruit and the root are used to let you know the quality of the lump and the branches. Now, we got to understand that the first fruit is represented as Hamashiach. The root is represented as Hamashiach. You can go into scripture. So if you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 20 through 23, you'll see that Hamashiach, the Messiah, is seen as the first fruit. If you go to Yeshayahu or Isaiah chapter 11, you're going to see that Hamashiach is also seen as the root. In fact, he comes forth out of the rod of the stem of Yesse, who is the father of King Dawood. And he comes from that same lineage. So he is also said to be the root that came of Yesse or Jesse. So we need to understand that. So Hamashiach is both the first fruit and the root. And because, of course, he is set apart and we are grafted in, or the northern kingdom was being grafted into him, and we are tied into him, then we all partake of that fatness that comes from the root. And therefore, we are also set apart. Now, if you go back to Yirmiyahu 11 verse 16, as I said, it says, "Yahuwah called thy name a green olive tree and of goodly fruit. With the noise of a great tumult he hath kindled fire upon it, and the branches are broken." So now the branches being tied back in, the Yashalites are that lump that are referred to, and the Yashalites are the branches that are referred to. We have to see this connection. In fact, a little bit more proof about these branches. Go to Bereshit, or Genesis chapter 49, verse 22. You'll see that Yosef, or Joseph, remember, Ephraim was named as one of the half-tribes of Yosef, is a fruitful bow, even a fruitful bow by a well, whose branches run over the wall. So understand this. We see that the branches are running over the wall, going outside of its set-apart territory, because that's what happened with Joseph. He was actually separated from his people when he was sold into captivity by his brothers. So he was put into a foreign nation, and he lived amongst the foreigners, the Gentiles, specifically the Egyptians. So understand this connection is all throughout. In fact, notice it also says he's a fruitful bow. We need to know that the name Ephraim, of Joseph's son, Ephraim actually ties to the meaning of being fruitful. So if you were to go now, because that we just looked at, that verse was actually a blessing from Yaakov, our father, right? But if you go to Devarim, or Deuteronomy chapter 33, you're going to see a blessing from Moshe that says this: let the blessing come upon the head of Joseph, and upon the top of the head of him that was separated from his brethren. Because see, there was foretelling in even this prophecy that was multi-layered. Not only was Joseph separated from his brethren, but now his seed line had even this connection of being separated from his brethren. That's why the northern kingdom, who had been separated and taken off into their Assyrian captivity, were considered to be the house of Joseph, in the house of Ephraim, because Ephraim was one of Joseph's sons that was born to him while he was in the land of Egypt, in the foreign land of Egypt. So we've got to understand, he was a sojourner, he was a stranger from his own land at that time, and actually he looked strange to his brethren when they came to see him. They didn't recognize him. So we have to see these connections. Now, look at one more thing over here in Bereshit, or Genesis chapter 48, verses 17 through 18, or 17 and 19 actually. It says, and when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, because Ephraim was the younger of Joseph's two sons, and Yaakov was about to bless him. But it displeased Joseph, because he said, well, no, Manasseh is the older one. So he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. And his father, Yaakov, refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He, Manasseh, also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly, his younger brother, speaking of Ephraim, shall be greater than he, and his seed, talking garden here, shall become a multitude of nations. So we have to understand, it was prophesied that Ephraim was going to be a multitude of nations. See, this was foretelling of the multiple nations that our people were now going to become. Because remember, Ephraim and Manasseh were receiving the blessing that would go to Joseph. It went to his seed. We have to understand this. In fact, when we get back to that name of Zion that is applied to our people and our territories, we got to understand that the word Zion comes from Sion. It comes from that word. And when you deal with Sion in rootstock, it now explains how that rootstock that we are tied into is Hamashiach, the Messiah. And the Sion is actually the upper branch cutting that is actually put into the cutting of the rootstock. So by his stripes we are healed, because now we have been reconnected to the olive tree. We have actually been tied in by way of us being the scion. So we have to see this connection. We have been tied into this union. So we can now bud and be fruitful, just as was prophesied in Yeshayahu chapter 27. Now, with that, if you were to go to the prophecies found in Yeshayahu, for instance, we go to 45 verse 17 and 25. It says, "But Yashrael shall be saved in Yahuwah with an everlasting salvation. Ye shall not be ashamed nor confounded, world without end." So Yashrael is being called a world without end in this passage. If you go on to Yeshayahu chapter 53 verse 2, it says, "For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground." Now this was prophecy about Hamashiach. Now I want you to see how this all comes together when you then read a writing by Shaul in Ephesians, the letter to the assembly at Ephesus. It says that Hamashiach may dwell in your hearts by faith, that ye being rooted and grounded in love. So we see some gardening going on here. Unto him be glory in the assembly by Hamashiach Yahusha throughout all ages, world without end. Amen. So we see once again that Shaul shows that he was writing to our people, those of our people who were living as Gentiles. This is who he was ministering to. It was never to the entire world. Although he traveled over extensive territories, he was going and reaching out to our people who have been dispersed due to all the different captivities we have been through. So this is what the grafting was all about. It was being grafted into Hamashiach, meaning our people were being tied back into our kingdom. In fact, we were grafted, not dealing with being drafted. No, we were already tied into the team from the beginning. It was just we had went astray and we were brought back to one kingdom after we were divided. And so this is the work that is taking place even today. Our people who are waking up are getting awakened to be prepared for this reuniting. We are going to have a huge family religion. Sorry about that. We are going to have a huge family reunion as the people of the Most High Yahuwah. It's extremely important for us to understand this. Now, I have one last thing before I show maybe a couple more prophecies, but I want us to be clear on this, that when you go into the book of John, chapter 11, it talks about how Hamashiach was doing ministry of miracles and many miracles, to the point where it got the attention of the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they had to come together and say, what are we going to do about this man, because he's doing so many miracles, to the point where they were now concerned that because he was getting so many people to follow him, that he was going to arouse the attention of the Romans, who were going to come and take away our land and take away our nation. So they were afraid that the Romans were going to come and further oppress our people and actually take away all that we had, because Hamashiach was doing so many miracles and getting such a following behind him. Now, understand that there's a connection in this passage that ties directly back to Shaul's ministry. And I want to uncover this because many people miss it, but it's right here in front of us. Now, understand that we're dealing with a specific thing in this passage, and we're specifically dealing with the Romans who were being, who the chief priests and the Pharisees were afraid of. And remember, grafting took place in the epistle that is addressed as to the Romans. Now, it wasn't addressed to the Roman people who were Roman by bloodline, but it's speaking of the people of Yashrael who were scattered amongst the Romans, who were living amongst the Romans. And so, but notice this connection. But wait, there's more. You go into verse 49, you find that one of the high priests Caiaphas, at that point, gave a prophecy. And he had prophesied earlier that year that Yahusha was going to die, not only for that nation. Now, who is that nation? Remember, the people he was with, the southern kingdom. But it goes on to say, not only for that nation of the southern kingdom, but also that he should gather together in one the children of the mighty one that was scattered abroad. So the Most High's children that were scattered now were referring to then Ephraim, or the northern kingdom. So in this passage, the high priest Caiaphas had already been exposed to a prophecy that he had given, saying that, look, this man, Yahushua Mashiach, is going to die not only for this nation, meaning the southern kingdom that's right around us, but he's also going to go and gather together those scattered children of the mighty one that are abroad. So this is why you see other things in passages such as to the 12 tribes that are scattered abroad, written by James, whose name is really Jacob, because James is just an English rendering of the true Abri name Jacob. But he wrote in chapter 1, verse 1 of James, you'll find it says to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Or you can go to Kepha, or who people know as Peter, in 1 Peter, verse 1. He's talking to the strangers that are scattered. So we've got to understand this is all about our people, Yashvalites. But we've missed our prophecies because we have not paid attention to who we are in the context of these writings. Now, not finished yet. There's one more thing to this passage. Notice, Yahusha no more walked among the Yahudim at that point because they were trying to put him to death. But check where he went. So he left the southern kingdom areas where the Yahudim were frequenting, and he then left and went into a country near to the wilderness, into a town called Ephraim. And there he continued with his disciples. So do you see what just happened here? This is a foretelling of what happened with Shaul's ministry. Because you have Yahusha was doing a bunch of miracles amongst the southern kingdom. And because the high priest and the Pharisees were afraid that the Romans were going to buckle down on their nation, they then started to plot to put Yahushua Mashiach to death. Yet, it was known that Yahushua was going to die for that nation, the southern kingdom, as well as for the other children of the Most High who have been scattered through those earlier dispersions from the northern kingdom. So he's going to join the southern and the northern kingdom. But then in verse 54, you see it says, because Yahusha was aware that they were going to try to put him to death, he no longer walked among the Yahudim, but he then turned and went into a town called Ephraim. Just like Shaul's ministry, because he started off speaking to the Yahudim. He started off speaking with the southern kingdom. That's who Shaul was dealing with initially. But then he turned and he had to go to the Gentiles of the northern kingdom, Ephraim. So this is all laid out right here in scripture for us to see, being foretold, or as some people have said, foreshadowed. Now, so understand that the olive tree is going to have all of its branches all back together according to prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 37. In fact, when you get to Ezekiel chapter 37, you'll see it says, and I will place them and multiply them and will set my sanctuary in the midst of them forevermore. And it says also, when you get to verse 28, and the heathen shall know that I, Yahuwah, do sanctify Yashrael, when my sanctuary shall be in the midst of them. Now, go to Ephesians. We're going back to Ephesus, right? Chapter 2, verses 15 through 18. Or actually, no, even further than that. It says, basically, for thou, or for through him, we both, you're dealing with two parties here, have access by one Spirit. So the two nations becoming one, the two folds becoming one, having one shepherd. And it says, unto the Father. Now, therefore, you are no more strangers and foreigners. Remember, I said they were being seen as strangers and foreigners because they were estranged from the ways of the Most High. But now they are fellow citizens with who? With the saints. So if you remember earlier on, I mentioned how Yahudah in the book of Oshay was still faithful with the saints. Well, now you see, since Yahudah was still considered to be with the saints, now you see that the northern kingdom are being grafted back in to be fellow citizens with those saints. We have to understand the saints are the people of the Most High as they were called to be. And it says, and of the household of the Mighty One, in whom all the building fitly framed together grows unto a holy, or I should say set apart, temple in Yahuwah, in whom ye also are built together for a habitation of the Mighty One Yahuwah. So if you understand, what Ezekiel had prophesied was about the Most High Yahuwah building his sanctuary amongst his people and living in the midst of his people, taking a dwelling in the midst of his sanctuary of Yashrael. Now, when you go to Ephesians, you see that that's the same thing that's being spoken of. That building that's being fitly framed together, made of both nations that have been split apart to join back to Yashrael. Very important for us to see, then we become the habitation of the Mighty One. Which is why in Amos chapter 9 verse 11, you see it says, in that day I will raise up the tabernacle of Dawood that is fallen, and close up the breaches thereof, and I will raise up his ruins, and I will build it as in the days of old. Now, we need to understand this. Once again, even in Yirmiyahu chapter 30 verse 10, the Most High gives us his assurance. It says, therefore, fear thou not, O my servant Jacob, saith Yahuwah, neither be dismayed, O Yashrael, for lo, I will save thee from afar, and thy seed from the land of their captivity, and Jacob shall return and shall be in rest, and be quiet, and none shall make him afraid. Now see, we shall be at rest because see, this is why we keep Shabbat even to this day, because these are a shadow of the things to come. When we keep Shabbat, it is showing that we know we are going to enter into that rest that was promised to our people. We are going to be restored as a kingdom. As it says in Acts chapter 1 verse 6, the disciples or the sent forth ones, the apostles of Yahusha, understood that the kingdom was to be restored for our people. In fact, when you get to the next verse, in Yirmiyahu chapter 30 verse 11, it says, for I am with thee, saith Yahuwah, to save thee, though I make a full end of all nations whither I have scattered thee, yet will I not make a full end of thee, but I will correct thee in measure, and will not leave thee altogether unpunished. See, this was all done for the punishment of our people, to correct us. Not just to put us through torment, but to correct us. We had to be corrected because we were living in sin, breaking and going astray from all of the ways that the Most High had told us to live by, and his laws, his commandments, his judgments, his statutes, his Shabbats, everything that he told us to live by, we went away from it. And even those who did it outwardly were not having their hearts, their minds, their spirit in the right place before Yahuwah. So, when you even go to Yirmiyahu chapter 46:28, you see that the Most High repeats himself as to what he just said in Yirmiyahu chapter 30 verse 11. So here in 46 verse 28, it says again, fear thou not, O Jacob, my servant, saith Yahuwah, for I am with thee. For I will make a full end of all the nations whither I have driven thee, but I will not make a full end of thee. So see, there's judgment that comes to all these other nations that have mishandled the people of the Most High Yahuwah. But he's not going to make a full end of his people. In fact, he says, but he will correct us in measure, and will not leave us wholly unpunished. So we need to understand this, because see, many people get it twisted when it comes to judgment. And nobody wants to talk about the fact that all these atrocities that have been done to our people, all the innocent blood that has been spilled of our people, all of the bondage and oppression and the lies that have been hurled at our people is going to have to be paid for. And the reason I say this is because, see, people don't want to speak this truth, and they want to sometimes hide it behind other things. They want to sugarcoat and say, well, karma is going to come get you. No, karma is not going to do a thing. There's no scripture on karma. Scripture says Yahuwah, the mighty one, almighty, the creator of this world, the creator of heavens and earth, he is going to bring judgment. In fact, you're going to find that the same law that our people have been judged by, that righteous law that the Most High gave us, that set apart law that he gave us to live by, is the same law that others are going to get judged by. In fact, if you were to go to Devarim or Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 15, you find that there's a law there that talks about how if you owe your brother, that you must pay your brother what you owe him, and don't let the sun set on you before you take care of that debt if you have it. If you have what you need to pay your brother back, do it as soon as you are able to do it. However, our people never got paid back for all the things that have been plundered from us. And so those people who have mistreated us and plundered our people now have a debt to pay. And it's not karma that's going to collect. It's the Most High Yahuwah that will collect. The same one who punished us and made us have to pay and be corrected for the sins that were committed by our fathers and by us even today. We now have a day that's coming, a day of rest that's coming, where that wine, that cup of wine that our people had to drink that had bitter dregs to it, that cup of wrath, I should say, we now are going to have that cup taken from our hand, and it gets passed to those who have wronged us. That's in the law. That anything, sin is going to have to be paid for. Now, the other thing that you'll find that, shows this is also in Thessalonians. Talks about this, that it's a righteous thing when, recompense is handled for those who have wronged his people. Now, I also want to say this. If you go to Obadiah, right, or Obadiah, chapter 1, verses 15 through 17, it says, for the day of Yahuwah is near upon all the heathen. So all those nations, as thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. You see that? You hear that golden rule? In fact, even Hamashiach said that, you should have mercy on others when you judge, because if you have mercy on them, then, that's the same judgment you're going to be judged with. But people have not had mercy on our people. Biological, spiritual, mental warfare has been waged all out against our people. So it goes on to say, as thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head. For as ye have drunk upon my holy mountain, so as us, Yashrael, we drink on that holy mountain of the Most High, so shall all the heathen drink continually. Yea, they shall drink, and they shall swallow down, and they shall be as though they had not been. So things are going to change. Change is going to come. But upon Mount Zion shall be deliverance. So Zion, that planting, that garden, that righteous planting of the Most High, and there shall be set apartness, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. So we are going to get back those things that were taken from us, but even in greater measure. And not only that, the forces of the other nations are going to come to us. This is righteous judgment being carried out. Even our punishment, as I said, was righteous judgment of the Most High Yahuwah because of the sins of our people. Now, you go on to verse 18 of Obadiah chapter 1, and I'm going to read this because it was sent to me by someone after I mentioned I would actually put this video up. So I definitely want to give a shout to you, Miss Deborah, for this, because this is going to help me out with really getting this clarity. It says, "In the house of Jacob shall be a fire, in the house of Joseph a flame, in the house of Esau for stubble, and they shall kindle in them and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau, for Yahuwah hath spoken it." See, the Most High speaks his judgment, and when he puts his word out, we already should know that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahuwah. We are living it out today. So, as has been said, so will be. We need to understand that. So there's judgment to be dished out. And we've got to understand that although our branches were broken, that we are going to get our branches back. And we will be that wholesome tree that we were created to be from the beginning. So, it's that time for our people, Yashrael, to get back to business with the laws, our Father's business. We need to get back to the commandments, the ways of the Most High. And I don't mean just by us trying to do it for outward show, but I mean to follow what is said in Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 27. How we should actually be going back, having his ways in us, having his set-apart spirit dwell in us, and we should be led by that spirit, and we should be showing the fruit of that spirit, and that should be the light that we are allowing to wake up our brethren and our sisters. Not as just going around giving blank commandments or directives to people, but we need to teach and nurture our people in the same grace and in the same patience that the Most High Yahuwah has had with our people. The same example that Yahushua HaMashiach has set for our people. We need to have that towards those of our people who are lost right now, because we ain't got a lot of time and the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. So, I hope this has been informative for you. Shalom, shalom, my people. Continue to grow in grace and continue to look forward and to move towards the righteousness that the Most High Yahuwah has been teaching us through his set-apart Ruach, or his Ruach HaKodesh. All right? Shalom, shalom.